What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, there's a topic that I'd like to do my best to tackle, and that is the question of whether diagnosing our clients is helpful. I know. Oh, I'm not trying to be clickbaity. This is like a genuine, very genuine, curious question that I would like to ask. I do think it's really useful for us to talk about these. What is happening with the lighting? It's a partly cloudy day today, so we're gonna get the lighting. The lighting's gonna be all over the place. And the lighting is so annoying. My main goal in this episode is not to be divisive at all. I genuinely just want to create some space to ask questions and hold the nuance. And at the very least, I hope that this makes you have kind of a critical thinking lens as you think about how we go about diagnosing in our field and the impacts on your clients as well. And of course, this does not constitute professional clinical advice or advice about what you should do about diagnosing. We're just gonna talk about it and think about it. When I saw that on our trusty friend, the Our Therapist subreddit that I've been referencing a bit more often recently, when I saw that somebody posted about this exact topic, I thought, let's see what people are saying as they're chiming in the comments and just kind of notice where people stand in this conversation. They're going to note some of the pros and some of the cons. Okay, so let's get into reading this Reddit post. And before I read it, they reference a diagnosis and I think say something not quite accurate about it, but that's not the bread and butter of the post. So I'll circle back to that in a second, but just before you leave some angry comments about that, just naming that I know it's there and we're going to touch on it. Here's the post. The title says, "I'm starting to disagree with this entire field, period." Quote, "I don't agree with how we need to diagnose on the first session for insurance or how insurance tells us what meets criteria. I don't agree with labeling someone who has a dysregulated nervous system from survival, labeling it bipolar when they need nurturing and to reconnect with themselves. Parentheses, just an example. I feel the DSM and field is outdated. I feel, quote, traditional therapy does not promote true healing. Just my opinion." Okay, so just to get it out of the way, because I know they said something about a diagnosis that is not accurate, a whole bunch of the comments on this post are related to what this user said about bipolar disorder, calling it a dysregulated nervous system that just needs nurturing. And I think most of us know that true bipolar disorder is much more complicated than something that just requires some nurturing. So since that is kind of a rabbit trail to the main topic at hand, I'm not going to dive into that right now, like what is bipolar disorder. So just know I'm intentionally skipping over that kind of mountain of a topic. We're going to focus on this question, like, is it helpful to diagnose someone? And this person brings up some really interesting points. Like, do we have to not only diagnose someone, but have that diagnosis in the first session? And are we doing it for insurance or are we doing it for our client? And how do we interact with some of the details that come up, whether it's insurance or a different third-party payer covering the care for this person? Is the DSM and the field outdated? And also they say traditional therapy doesn't promote true healing, which brings up this question, what is traditional therapy? Also, what is true healing? What does that look like? So we're kind of getting into all kinds of stuff just from this post. The question that comes to mind for me when I read this post initially is like, do we all diagnose in the first session? And if you do diagnose in the first session, what's your primary motivator for doing so? Is it because, it's in the best interest for your client? Or is it for a different reason, such as in order to get reimbursement from insurance? But even that question is quite black and white because it's very easy to make the argument that it's in the best interest of our client to have their session reimbursed by insurance. I told you it was going to be nuanced, so that's where we're already in it. We're in the nuance. I don't know how Reddit sorts these because you can do it based on top comments versus best comments, and I don't know the difference between best and top. So I just said top, which I assume has the most upvotes. Do you have any guesses what the top comment is going to be? I would have guessed that it'd be about insurance, and it is, but it's a different angle than I thought it was going to be, and it's interesting that this is the top comment. They say, Don't forget that if/when clients apply for life insurance, the company will pull all their medical records, and if they have, quote, troubling diagnoses, they may be denied or receive a higher premium. Be careful with your clients, especially if you're not, and if you are, a prescriber. Ooh, so that's got 647 upvotes and a bunch of replies, which is a fascinating issue. So in response to this comment where, they said, be careful because maybe you won't receive life insurance or have a higher premium, one person says, adjustment disorders for the win. Label your clients as mildly as possible. I get that's already a divisive statement. There's going to be people who go, yeah, and other people who go, what? Okay, in response to this adjustment disorders for the win comment, someone says, I was very upset when my military doc labeled me with adjustment disorder until I started studying this field and realized he probably saved my military career. I was actively suicidal and depressed. Probably wouldn't have made it past my next security review. I mean, this is where it gets so real, and I think this is catching some of why I wanted to talk about this. If the therapist, military doc, was under-diagnosing them in the paperwork on purpose, could we make an argument that they were doing that for the client's benefit? Because if they diagnosed them with something more severe, is it possible that this client would have lost their job? And ethically, how would you feel having that hanging over your head, knowing that according to the DSM, you may have offered this person the most accurate diagnosis, and in doing so, you may have caused them to lose their job, even if also from what you can perceive of this client, they are more than capable of performing well at their job. Like, just the layers, the nuance. Who are we prioritizing when we diagnose someone and diagnose them as accurately as we can? I mean, people kind of trail off here on the comments about, is it okay to use the diagnosis of adjustment disorder and for how long and all of that. But it's certainly a thing. It is certainly a thing that people will use a diagnosis of adjustment disorder either to say that somebody meets criteria for a disorder and so that they can get funding because maybe there isn't an available alternative disorder that might apply, or people will use it in order to avoid putting a more severe diagnosis just in case that might negatively impact the client, such as the example of that person in the military being fearful that they might lose their job. Here's somebody offering kind of a counter perspective to what we've heard so far. They say, honestly, I think it is fraud to diagnose a perceived insurance preference instead of the person and symptoms in front of me. If the symptoms showed up after a stressor, adjustment. If the stressor was life-threatening and the symptoms are about that, PTSD. If the symptoms are anxiety about a lot of stuff, GAD. Depression about a lot of stuff, MDD. If I mildly diagnose, then insurance won't understand the need for ongoing care. If I overdiagnose, that's stigmatized and doesn't support recovery. Mental health disorders are real. We do no one any favors by pretending they are interchangeable labels. As I read through these, just genuinely sharing my reaction, I do feel this sense of like, everyone is right. Everyone is right. It is insurance fraud to adjust down or adjust up your diagnosis for the sake of trying to benefit your client if that's not the diagnosis that somebody meets criteria for based on the DSM. And let me repeat what I said earlier, that I'm not offering any sort of recommendation or opinion about which of those paths is the best one or the right one or what you should do, but it's not cut and dry. Like, we might be leaning into doing the right thing by insurance, but it may still potentially harm our client in some way. Or we may try to do the best thing by our client, but then we may be dabbling in some insurance fraud. And there's an ethical dilemma happening here of like, which of those things do we prioritize? And sometimes there's even more layers beyond those. It's complicated. I mean, yeah, somebody else responds to this comment saying, it's also fraud to make people pay for healthcare and then don't cover 90% of everything. Yeah. Okay, so this conversation about adjustment disorders is quite lengthy, but think we can move on for now. So some of the other comments in response to that initial top comment about maybe getting denied life insurance. The next top comment says, again, a sign of brokenness in the system, the fact that we have to instantly define problems in order to treat them. It can definitely be helpful sometimes, but not always. Practitioners having to bend to the whims of insurance companies is backwards and not client-centered. It's really, really tricky because we might say, well, it also is client-centered because we want our clients to be able to afford therapy. But yeah, maybe the rules that the insurance companies are operating under are not keeping the client's best interests in mind, at least sometimes. In my opinion, allegedly. Please don't sue me, anybody who might want to. Just reading some people's thoughts. So far, everything that we've been talking about is in regards to this one top comment and then the conversation that's taken place in response to that top comment about life insurance. So let's move on to the second top comment in response to the initial post. Someone says, well, I agree that there's a ton of hoop jumping and BS, though I think many of you seriously overestimate how much you have to play the game. That's all it is. You don't have to believe deeply in the notes and treatment plans you write. The reality is that almost any helping profession will involve getting down in the muck of broken systems to do anything worthwhile, and you just got to get over it and not lose sight of the things that actually matter. It's an interesting take. Like, do we just kind of see this idea of like, yeah, insurance is just a hoop you have to jump through to get your clients paid for, but then you can just do the work with your client that doesn't have to be influenced by insurance. I mean, if insurance has anything to say about it, then say, no, that's not how it works. And that is definitely dabbling into the land of insurance fraud. So is this person saying you should commit insurance fraud? Not outright, but it's a dicey thing to say out loud. So, all right. And the third top comment says, I'm curious what you mean by, quote, traditional therapy. Now, remember in the first original post, they said, quote, I feel traditional therapy does not promote true healing. So here the third top comment says, I'm curious what you mean by, quote, traditional therapy. I would call myself a traditional therapist, but I'm certainly no fan of how the insurance industry, state governments, Medicaid, etc. create barriers to healing. However, I have chosen to work within that more traditional system in order to serve the people who are there as best I can and advocate for a better system. I think that probably represents where a lot of us are as therapists. When we become a therapist, we genuinely want to help people. Most of us, I do believe that. And we're trying to do the best we can to help people within the existing systems that be. And we all kind of take different routes to make the best of it. So it looks different from person to person, but most of us aren't feeling like zero cognitive dissonance around like, I'm doing the best I can to help my clients, and like it's easy for clients to access care and for me to get paid and to like work with the powers that be to make sure that therapy is paid for and affordable. Like, I think most of us know that the system is a hot mess, but people still need help, and we're here to help as best as we can within the existing system. So here we are. The next top comment on the post says, I view this in a way you may like and may sound familiar. Two things can be true at the same time that do not align. You can fulfill the insurance requirements while still holding your own views on diagnosis and treatment. Insurance is a means by which you get paid, and there are requirements they ask in order for them to pay. Do the requirements and treat the client in a way you and the client are in agreement with. My reaction to that is, that sounds good. That's what I was taught in grad school. And then I said in grad school, I will always be a therapist who takes insurance, because why would I deny someone getting paid for their care and not accept insurance? But the reality is, if you comply with the insurance's rules, there's going to be a lot of cases where you're not going to receive coverage for your clients. And I definitely saw that, especially in private practice, accepting insurance, the amount of denied claims that would come through because I was genuinely putting the diagnosis based on what I knew of the DSM for that client. And a lot of insurance companies would say, that's not severe enough for us to cover. Sorry. So if we said like, okay, let's just comply with insurance and, treat the client accordingly, then a lot of clients would not be able to afford therapy. So that's not good. The next top comment kind of has an interesting way of frame. They're a little less gentle in their framing. Let's say, They say, quote, "I won't have an issue with diagnosing, but I think you're being a little dramatic to say you're disagreeing with the whole field. You're not unique with the opinion. If you're a private pay clinician, this isn't an issue. You don't have to diagnose. If you accept insurance, you have to. However, diagnoses are only important for two things, insurance and validation. Treatment is dictated by their symptoms and goal." I think this person meant this in a lighthearted way, even though it can be sort of combative to call someone being a little dramatic, but it's true. This isn't a particularly unique opinion. I think that's why this is also one of the top posts in this subreddit, talking about, questioning the whole field. Oh, okay. The next top comment says something that is at least news to me, and I can't confirm if this is true or not, but they say, "This is the American insurance industry approach to therapy. Diagnoses aren't required in other places." And then somebody responds and says, "I was just thinking this entire field and American insurance model are not the same thing. I don't run into this at all in my practice." People who don't live in the US, can you fill us in? For any countries where whether it's insurance or third-party payers, where clients don't have to pay out of pocket, or there's available avenues for clients to not pay out of pocket for therapy, tell us in the tell us in the comments, how does it work? How do we do that? That would be nice. If there was no tie between diagnosis and life insurance, or needing your therapy to be paid for, or your job being on the line because of it, then personally, I find diagnosing quite helpful, because most people find it very useful to see that what they're experiencing, if it meets criteria for a formal diagnosis, that this is a thing that we've seen, we have treatments for it, we have evidence-based approaches to help somebody cope or recover or fill in the blank. And so that would just uncomplicate things so much. So tell us, those of you in other countries, tell us your ways. How is it working? Tell me everything. I want to know. Why aren't we doing it that way then? Oh gosh, we could say that about a lot of things in the US, but that's not what this episode's about. Yeah, someone else responds, "Yeah, it's crazy what happens to the field because the American healthcare infrastructure is ran for profit." Yet, I'm just going to give that one some snaps. I just wanted to lean into this conversation because this conversation happens in my thought world all the time. There is no clinical advice or practical tools for what to do from here, except an encouragement to use your own critical thinking. I encourage us all to think about the systems that we operate in and how do we engage with these systems while keeping our top priority, client care. I don't claim to have the answers, but I would love for this to be an ongoing conversation that keeps getting, attention. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just giving this attention, and you all take it and keep giving it attention. And before we close, I'd like to thank TherapyNotes.com for sponsoring this video. TherapyNotes helps with all of your practice management needs, from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform included for free for all users, and so much more. If you'd like to check out TherapyNotes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Well, thanks for joining me in this conversation, this little trail off of musings and reflections. Thank you to the original commenter and all those who responded, because even just talking about this publicly, I feel like has some amount of felt risk, at least. Ooh, am I going to get in trouble for sharing my opinion? Even though nobody said anything illegal or that sort of thing. But it is tricky and scary. So let's make it less scary. We'll just talk about it. Free speech. All right, my battery's dying, so I'm going to sign off. Until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.